Hey everyone, Joe Waxman here, and in this video I want to look at the chart of Jim Morrison of The Doors, famous rocker, poet. Guys, don't forget to hit the like button and please subscribe if you have not already. Alrighty. Jim Morrison, I'm sure you all know him. Pretty famous guy. All right. Singer, poet, songwriter, lead vocalist of Doors. Let's see. He's a very wild, erratic character, led a alcoholic, drug-fueled existence. Died at age 27. He's one of the most influential frontmen in rock history. Since his death, his fame has endured. It's one of pop culture's top rebellious and oft displayed icons. Okay. Together with pianist Ray Manzarek, Morrison found the Doors in 1965 in Venice, California. 1965. It's worth noting that this is astrologically, this is the time when Pluto conjunct Uranus in Virgo. And so that was a very, very potent period in history because, excuse me, the outer planets are the planets that affect society most, right? And Neptune was in Scorpio. So Neptune and Scorpio really fueled the drug quality, the destructive. Neptune in itself represents drugs and alcohol potentially, among other things. But in Scorpio, it's really getting deep and dark, and so a lot of that was represented in the hippie counterculture. And then Pluto conjunct Uranus was very potent, very destructive and deep and powerful and awakening, and so that's quite interesting. So the Doors did represent that sort of powerful a generational quality from the outer planets. All right. Light My Fire was their initial #1 hit. He recorded a total of 6 Doors albums. All were successful. He was well known for improvising spoken word poetry, and he embodied the hippie counterculture rebellion, according to Manzarek. He developed alcohol dependency throughout his band's career. He died in Paris, age 27, amid several conflicting witness reports. As part of the 27 Club, Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, who else? I mean, I guess Amy Winehouse. There's probably several others. No autopsy was performed. The cause of Morrison's death remains disputed. Later in the Wikipedia, it says it was heart failure. So, could be heroin. They said heroin. Some people said heroin overdose. And he was ranked by, I mean, who cares? It's just people's opinion. It's not really important what somebody thought about his voice. Who cares? He was his parents were military, or at least his father was, and so he traveled around a lot when he was young. And his father was quite strict and disciplined with him, and he would yell at him a lot and berate him. When he was very young, he witnessed a car accident in the desert in which some Native American Indians were dead on the side of the road, and it impacted him greatly. According to his family, the event was minor compared to Jim Morrison's description, which was much more dramatic. and elaborate and like dead Indians all over the road. Apparently that was not the case according to his parents, but it doesn't really matter. He was very young, and that was impactful, and he felt like upon their death they jumped into his soul, according to him, which is interesting, right? So I guess he feels quite like a Native American soul spirit or something like that. He was actually very intelligent. He had an IQ of 149, which is quite high. 100 is the average, right? So let's see. He read a lot. He was very interested in philosophy and beat poets, existential philosophers. Jim read as much and probably more than any student in class. He was interested in demonology. So that's interesting. Dark stuff, demons and whatnot. He moved around a lot, like I said. What else? He studied film at college and did not attend the ceremony. At age 19, he was arrested for drunken behavior at a football game. Then he got into the Doors, and he was already writing poetry. He was in Venice, and he was living a bohemian lifestyle on his friend's roof, taking lots of LSD and living off of canned beans. That's funny, interesting. He was writing poetry, and the fellow bandmates shared a common interest in Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. That's the transcendental meditation. They have a community in Fairfield, Iowa. I actually lived there for a little while. I was not into the TM itself, but I did appreciate the community at large. I do appreciate meditation, just not as formalized as they do it in TM. The Doors of Perception came from Aldous Huxley's book, which in turn came from William Blake's Marriage of Heaven and Hell. If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite. And it has its connection to psychedelic drug use, the whole hippie acid thing. All right, what else? He was wild. He was very wild. Alcoholic, into lots of drugs and whatnot. Very rebellious. He went on Ed Sullivan's show, and this seems very very juvenile, almost like innocent today, like extremely innocent, like, you know, when you got Cardi B singing about her wet vagina. And he went on Ed Sullivan's show, and they wanted him to change the lyrics of "Girl, we couldn't get much higher" to "Girl, we couldn't get much better." They agreed, and then they sang the song as it is. And Ed Sullivan was so pissed that he wouldn't shake any of the band's hand. And he said, "Oh, you're never gonna play here again." And he said, "Hey, man, we just did the Ed Sullivan. We just did the Sullivan show." Defiantly. So, you know, they had the big success, and then Jim Morrison got himself into trouble being drunk and wild and crazy and rebellious, and sexually, I mean, he was very attracted to the opposite sex, and he had lots of partners. Very liberal, sexually liberal. He was showering with a woman backstage, and a policeman came in and, not knowing who Jim Morrison was, ordered him to leave, and Jim Morrison mockingly repeated, "Eat me." He was maced by the officer. The show was delayed. Once on stage, he told the concert goers an obscenity-filled version of the incident. New Haven police arrested him for indecency and public obscenity, but the charges were later dropped. Morrison was later the first rock performer to be arrested on stage during a live performance. Okay. And he hobnobbed with a lot of the, you know, normal rock star stuff, where other people, you know, rock stars getting together, hanging out, whatnot. Who cares? Morrison attempted to spark a riot at a show in the audience by screaming, "You want to see my cock?" and other obscenities. 3 days later, 6 warrants for his arrest were issued by Dade County Public Department for indecent exposure, among other accusations. Doors had to cancel a bunch of shows. Morrison was convicted of indecent exposure and profanity, and he was sentenced to 6 months in prison and had to pay a $500 fine. Remained free on a $50,000 bond. This is interesting. This is a quote by Jim Morrison. I wasted a lot of time and energy with the Miami trial, about 1.5 years, but I guess it was a valuable experience because before the trial, I had a very unrealistic schoolboy attitude about the American judicial system. My eyes had been opened a bit. There were guys down there, black guys, that would go each day before I went on. It took about 5 minutes, and they would get 20 or 25 years in jail. If I hadn't unlimited funds to continue fighting my case, I'd be in jail right now for 3 years. It's just, if you have money, you generally don't go to jail. Well, that's interesting. All right. Death. So yeah, I mean, he died in the bathtub, 27, heart failure, and heroin. So that's what they say, but nobody's 100% sure, and there are conspiracy theories. His father would dress him down, it's a military term, dressing down, which consisted of yelling at and berating the children until they were reduced to tears and acknowledged their failings. Seems pretty damn destructive to me. That seems like trauma for the kid, trauma inducing. That's traumatizing. So regardless of you're actually physically hitting them or not, there's many ways to abuse. So he was verbally abused by his father. So that's pretty destructive. According to people, he had a Jekyll and Hyde kind of personality. When he'd start to drink, he'd flip a switch and turn into a maniac. He had many different relationships with many different women, some a bit more serious, but he didn't marry. But you know, he was wildly promiscuous, which was common at the time. It's sort of like the free love, you know, era. Drugs, rock and roll, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Pamela Corson, I think, was one of his longer, more serious relationships, but you know, he was with a lot of different women. And even celebrities, including Janis Joplin, who herself was with a lot of different celebrities, and they had similarities in their astrology chart too, which I'll get to. Morrison treated Joplin cruelly at a party. She reportedly hit him over the head with a bottle of whiskey, which she always carried, or something like that, rum, whiskey, Southern Comfort, I don't know, one of those. And she referred to Morrison as that asshole whenever his name was brought up. So apparently he was an asshole. So surprised by that. Not. At the time of Morrison's death, there were 37 paternity actions pending against him, although no claims were made against his estate by any of the putative paternity claimants. So that means 37 kids, right? That's what it means. 37. He had 37 illegitimate kids. Maybe some of them weren't, but probably some of them were. Okay, I mean that's pretty much the gist of it. I don't know if there's anything else relevant there. Let's go into his astrology. Alrighty. Sagittarius sun and Sagittarius are wild. Sagittarius are partiers. Sagittarius love to celebrate. They're fun. They're adventurous. They love to travel. They're very philosophical, high-minded, and you know, people, they're very blunt too. That's the thing about Sag. They just love giving their advice and telling other people what they should be doing. But they're, you know, very intelligent, very high-minded, very wild and fun and free spirits. So yeah, I mean that's quite. It's also 10th whole sign, 10th quadrant, but 11th whole sign house. So, you know, for career and career success and groups, that's all very, you know, accentuated here. The sun is ruling the 7th house, the 7th lord in the 10th/11th house. Yeah. So that's, you know, that's all very good. It's basically sextile the ascendant and trine the descendant, so it's in good aspect, good visibility, pretty high in the sky. You know, very strong sun, so definitely good for career success. And sun in Sagittarius does pretty well because it's trying its rulership in Leo and its exaltation in Aries. It's good, pretty good dignity for the sun. It is square Chiron and semi-square Venus in Scorpio. So this aspect is destructive, or at least, well, yeah, I mean, because the square to Chiron really brings out the rejection, the wounds, the hurt. Chiron also itself is sitting on the 8th house cusp in Virgo. So we can see there's definitely a lot of wounds, of pain, of rejection, of feeling like an outcast, of feeling just completely, you know, like wounded by society, by his parents, by whatever, right? This is not specifically his parents, but it's just general pain and wounds and rejection, especially because of the square, a very strong square to the degree. Right, so this difficult aspect really brings out the worst qualities in Chiron, especially initially, right? And then the semi-square, the midpoint, right, is right exactly on Venus in Scorpio. Venus in Scorpio itself is not a dignified position for Venus because Venus rules Taurus, right? So it's in detriment here. But this Venus being our what we love, what we enjoy, our sense of aesthetics, beauty, creativity. You know, Scorpio is going to make it. It's going to be very destructive in Scorpio, and so this Venus is not good, not healthy. It's in the 9th house, so bringing in philosophy, religion, even mysticism, because Scorpio is combining sort of like 8th and 9th house stuff. So he's into like the, remember demonology? He was into demonology. Right, so Venus and Scorpio, poorly aspected by Chiron and the Sun. So this grouping, Sun, Chiron, Venus, and Scorpio, that's very difficult. This poor Venus is really, so his what this is showing is that his what he enjoys is very destructive. It's very dark, high-minded, you know. So like the you know, he's very intelligent. 9th house is you know, it's in the 10th whole sign house, by the way, but still 9th house, very strong 9th house. That his sense of religion, mysticism, and like advanced studies are going to be Venusian, so literary, artistic, but at the same time dark and wounded and painful, and expressing some like rejection, being an outcast, death, themes of death, right? Venus is also ruling the IC, so early childhood. His early childhood was difficult. We can safely say that. and it had scorpionic themes. 0 degrees Scorpio, no less. 0 degrees of any sign is going to bring out the sort of beginner's mind, no limitations, really endless possibilities, going too far at 0 degrees. Planets can go too far at 0 degrees, right? Also sextile a 0 degree Mercury. So for poetry, this is really writing, poetry, expression, all that. That's very prominent here, right? Mercury is ruling the 5th house and the 8th house. So yeah, so creativity, and it's in the 11th house, so like bands, groups, networks, so that's very prominent for Jim Morrison, being part of a group, a network. So the Doors, obviously, with Sun approaching the 11th house cusp, and then Mercury squarely in the 11th house. I mean, it's in the 12th whole sign house, but much closer to the 11th house cusp, in the 11th house quadrant, right? But it's disposited by Saturn here in the 5th. And then there's actually a mutual reception between Saturn and Mercury, right? Saturn's in Gemini, Mercury is in Capricorn. So these two are trading places, energies, 11th and 5th house, actually 12th, 11th, 12th, and 5th, because Saturn's the 12th cusp ruler and the 1st cusp. 11th, 12th, 1st, 5th. So those energies are trading. And Saturn is in Gemini, so the wordsmith, creative expression, talent, skills. So that's quite prominent, quite strong. 11th house is also career success and popularity, because it is a social house and it's a group, sort of niche. So you often see like within a niche, within a certain grouping, that they become very popular if the 11th house is good, if the 11th house is strong or heavily populated by planets. Okay, right. So the Sun ruling the 7th house shows that he's going to attract people towards his popularity groups, to his career success. So it's going to have to do with him being in a band, right? He's attracting a lot of people, being the front man in a band, right? Sun in the 10th house for career, but Sun, influencing the 11th house also shows that leader of a group. Sun in the 11th, it can be leading the group. Mercury in the 11th means speaking in groups, communicating in groups, right? So that's all very telling. Jim Morrison. He has his moon in Taurus, so that's great for general sort of contentment, happiness of the moon. Moon is exalted in Taurus. Taurus is very aesthetic, beauty oriented, creativity, voice, and so for the arts, for poetry, for communication, for singing, that's prominent. I mean, obviously not all moon in Taurus alone is not going to create a great voice. Might help, but it's also in the 3rd house, so that's going to, for the poetry, that's definitely going to help a lot, right? For the creativity, for creative expression, beautiful creative expression, moon in Taurus in the 3rd house. Excuse me. 4th whole sign house, but 3rd quadrant. And moon is ruling the 6th house, so that's also interesting. So conflict. Moon is ruling the house of conflict, of health, of competition, of service to others. And it's in the 3rd house. So 3rd house being expression, so conflictual expression, right? We're also seeing that with Mars conjunct Uranus, Mars ruling the 3rd house cusp, but I'll get to that. But moon ruling the 6th house shows that conflict is going to come out of his ability to express himself, right? He's going to express himself, and he's going to get into trouble. especially, I mean, Moon's in good dignity, so you can probably get away with a lot of it, but Moon is square the nose, Moon is square Pluto, Moon is semi-square Saturn. So we have the same shape here. I don't know what this shape is called, but it's a shape, the square with two semi-squares. He has that again. And so he's got basically three difficult aspects on the Moon. First, the square to the nose. So that's actually you can count that as 2, and then Pluto 3, and then Saturn 4. So his Moon is really difficult because on the one hand, it's great because it's exalted in Taurus, in third house. So for poetry, for expression, skills and talents, communication, that's all great, right? That's really supportive of him as a singer, of him as a poet. But the square to the nodes, the square to Pluto, and the semi-square to Saturn, which is his ascendant lord, that's difficult, right? That's really adding to this whole, like we see this, this difficult aspect here especially with the Venus in Scorpio, 0 degrees, and the Moon in Taurus, and they're not actually opposite, but somewhat semi-opposite, Moon and Venus, but opposite by sign anyway. So his emotion, his satisfaction, his emotions, that's going to be, in some ways, he's very easily satisfied by, food, drink, materialism, whatever. Moon in Taurus can generally find easy satisfaction in its, material security of food and money and all that. But the semi-square to Saturn and the square to Pluto's and the square to the nodes, creating a lot of destructive pressure on the Moon. Semi-square to Saturn is going to make his expression more dry and restricted, which is not bad actually, because sometimes like that Capricornian Saturnian expression where it gets very dry is beautiful in itself. It has its own, it's not overly emotional. It gets very dry, and sometimes that's really it creates a nice quality, right? We saw that actually with, like, if you look at the 90s when Uranus and Neptune were in Capricorn conjunct, the artistic quality that came out of that was really unique. It was very dry. It wasn't emotional, but it was very dry expression, right, and powerful, and very like weird and strange, but cool at the same time. So the semi-square to Saturn is, especially with Saturn in Gemini, it's going to create some unique expression that is both dry, and because Moon in Taurus being exalted, and that in itself is very expressive, very voluptuous, right? And then Saturn in Gemini, again, bringing more like the words, right, and the expression, like a dry expression and intellect. But there is still, it's still difficult for the Moon. It's, that in itself, I wouldn't say is going to be a deal breaker. Like, it's not going to be terrible. It's just going to add some unique quality, some dryness, some restrictiveness, and some restrictiveness is okay. And some challenge is okay. But this square to Pluto and the nodes, that's really difficult. Moon square Pluto is going to bring out very destructive qualities, and it's going to come through relationships because Pluto's in the 7th house, right? Conjunct the 7th house cusp, and Moon's ruling the 6th house, and it's in the 3rd. So there's, the expression with relationships with others is going to tend towards very destructive quality, and we saw that, right? Where he's just like, oh, you want to see my cock to a whole crowd, and just being like really obscene and stuff like that, and like talking back to the cops and whatnot. Like his expression is becoming very destructive. right? Because the square to Pluto is going to bring out the most, like the worst aspects of Pluto, the really destructive quality. And it is also opposite. It's conjunct the North Node, which he died at 27, so he wasn't activating this North Node, but by opposition to South Node, it's still being activated, and not in a great way, because it's conjunct the descendant, opposite the South Node, opposite the ascendant. So his relationships are tending towards a very destructive quality, because, you know, like Janis Joplin, like that's just one example, you know, one that we can point to, like that asshole, she called him, and hit a, you know, whiskey bottle on his head. And I guess David Crosby said he was an asshole, right? You know, treated her like an asshole. So his relationships are tending towards this destructive quality, power, control, dominance, dominating. That's Pluto. Psychologically, you know, manipulating, controlling. So, and plus, you know, with the North Node here, he's not attacked, because the South Node, when he's young, the South Node's activated. So he's all about himself. He's a bit egotistical. By the way, this is the same with the nodes, the same position that Janis Joplin had: South Node conjunct ascendant, North Node conjunct descendant. I mean, it's close enough. It's 4 degrees apart. So she lived a similar lifestyle, like tons and tons and tons of partners, because her North Node is not activated, right? I said if she had lived long enough, she would have found her true love, and so would he, and he would have been devoted, like obsessively devoted, with this Pluto here conjunct the North Node. But that never came to pass. So he was just detached, you know, having hundreds, maybe thousands of women, who knows. And then his moon is tied into the nodal axis by the square, showing that, putting a lot of pressure on this moon to be creative and expressive in Taurus, 3rd house. And moon, when it's in aspect to the nodes, is not so good. When it's conjunct the South Node, it can create a lot of emotional imbalance. And who had that? I just did somebody who had that. I'm drawing a blank. Any case. Oh, Princess Diana. Princess Diana had South Node conjunct moon. So it creates a lot of emotional disturbance, especially when young, if it's conjunct the South Node, but psychic or very sharp mind as they get older. If it's conjunct the North Node, obsessive about their emotional satisfaction. These people can never get enough, because the moon is what we need to feel emotionally satisfied. So it's somewhere in between that, you know, emotional disturbance, obsessive as he gets older. So yeah. Highly intuitive though, you know, it's like, especially in Taurus, it's like, you know, for his poetry, he's really going to be drawing from the nether region, you know, just drawing it in, because of the connection to the nodes, right? But it's going to be a challenging point for him too. So that's interesting. And moon also represents early childhood, mother, and so it does show something good, moon in Taurus, but a lot of difficulty and challenges, destructive, restriction through authority, elders, things like that. Pluto semi-square Saturn is going to create very heavy, intense friction with authority, especially with the powers that be, power structures. Saturn is his ascendant lord, but it's at the same time, it does represent authority and the law. And Pluto is all about, you know, destruction, especially when it's in hard aspect, destructive power, destructive, you know, this raw desire and destructive quality. So he's going to have his run-ins, especially because Moon's ruling the 6th house, run-ins with the law. Hold on. Mars is ruling the 3rd house, as well as the MC. And Mars is in Gemini conjunct Uranus. So again, we're seeing the 3rd house being excited and activated with Uranus. This is why he's got this really another layer to this sharp, acerbic tongue, really rebellious in his actions and his expression. Gemini as well is adding to that. It's both the third house ruler and in Gemini. In the fourth house, fifth whole sign house. So Mars conjunct Uranus is explosive. It's violent, but in a very like almost like a bomb going off. It's a little different than other sort of like Mars and Saturn, although Saturn's not too far from Mars here, but Uranus is much closer. So he is very explosive, even potentially violent, but maybe more verbally so because Gemini, right? And so that's why, like, they say he's such an asshole. Not only that, but these are retrograde, so he's going against the grain. When Saturn's retrograde, it definitely does not want to go with the law, wants to go against the law. Uranus retrograde is very rebellious, right? But these have generally good aspects. It's trine the ascendant. And he has, okay, so he has an air trine. It's a light one, but Neptune is here in Libra, making the third leg of this grand air trine. So for poetry, for writing music, that's very strong. Uranus is going to make his expression very independent, very unique, very spontaneous, musical as well. Uranus is rhythmic because it's now. So it's the beat. Uranus represents the rhythm, the beat. So that, you know, spoken word, that sort of thing, that's gonna be indicated here. Fourth house is early childhood and homeland, home. So like it's what he likes to do at home, what he loves. He loves to be spontaneous, expressive, poetic, right? Just freestyle even with the Uranus here. And potentially very aggressive, especially verbally so. And his career is going into Gemini expression and, you know, just being fourth house, so like things he loves, but also fifth house, creativity. Saturn is also ruling the 12th house in the fifth house, first and 12th. So, and it's mutual reception with Mercury, like I said. So that's very good for creativity. Saturn for creativity is not great, but what I said, Saturn can create a very dry expression, and that's quite nice sometimes. Like we don't always want overly emotional expression. Like, you know, sometimes evoking the emotions too much is just exhausting, you know. So sometimes, you know, a Capricornian dry Saturnian expression can be really nice at times because it's not evoking the emotions. It's creativity without the emotions. Or, you know, not without the emotions, but the emotions are subdued, repressed, right? So I don't want to say repressed. This may not be the right word. They're just not taking the front and center stage. Again, that can be very nice at times to have that drier expression. And so he does that. His music is not very emotional driven, but it is very powerful and deep, right? Like I never found, you know, Jim Morrison to be sappy or overly sentimental, but it's very deep and potentially destructive, right? At times you get that, the darker plutonic, scorpionic quality. There's not really a lot of, I mean, Venus is in Scorpio, but it's not really Cancerian or Piscean. Although Neptune doesn't, it's not emotional. I'll just say that. Not emotional, not sentimental. Okay. Jupiter and Sun are also in a mutual reception. Jupiter is here in the 7th house. And so that actually gives him a very good connection with the audience. 7th and 11th cusp, Lord's trading places. So that those are both social houses, representing career success, popularity, others, the masses. And Sun in the 7th is great for performance, great for being on stage, but so is Sun in the 11th. And again, like I said, it's in the 10th, but coming up on the 11th house cusp, 10th, 11th, right? And then Jupiter. Jupiter is also ruling the 2nd house. So his voice, he's considered a great singer, but I don't think his voice is really what is so great about Jim Morrison. His voice is okay, in my opinion, but this does strengthen his voice, this mutual reception. It's not so much by degree, but by sign. Sun's in Jupiter's sign of Sagittarius, and obviously Sun rules Leo. So this is good, and it helps both the Sun and Jupiter. And a strong Jupiter is great for success, and popularity and performance, being on stage for the 7th house, and all that, and wealth and just success in general. So that's quite strong, and it does strengthen his voice. Jupiter ruling the 2nd house as well. I left Black Moon Lilith in here in the 7th house because he is a sexual icon. And he had tons of sexual adventures. Lilith is trine the Sun, so that's furthering this idea of him being this sex icon. His music is often has a very sexual undertones, but a lot of music did back then, so it wasn't unusual. But it is prominent. Pluto as well has this sexual quality. I mean, typically Mars is male sexuality, but Pluto can have a sexual element to it. I mean, it's less physical, but it does have that something. It adds an element. It's all about like power and control, and that can be very alluring. So he had that as well. What else? Talked about Neptune being part of this grand trine, and that's quite good. It's also influencing his ascendant and the nodes, well, the south node. So the expression, that's very strong. What else? Sun seems to be a little opposite Mars. That's very competitive, right? Combative. Let's see here. Let me pull up. What is this? Oh, this I just briefly. What is this? August 31st, 1965. Okay, I was just looking at when he started the doors, where the planets were. Obviously, this is a Pluto-Uranus conjunction. But I don't want to take much time with that. Okay, so this is his draconic chart. So 12th house planets, Mars and Uranus, coming into the ascendant. Saturn in good dignity here on the ascendant. Saturn on the ascendant can produce somebody who's very authoritative, well-respected, especially if it's in good dignity. Somebody who's really a real, like, I always looked, well, there's two examples. One is Margaret Thatcher, and the other is Sean Connery, right? So you can feel that Saturnian influence in both. Margaret Thatcher was leader of a country, prime minister, the Iron Lady, and Sean Connery is, James Bond. He's just like, extremely masculine man, right? He has in Capricorn. So this is, quite good for him being, a boss man, leader type. Lots of 2nd house activation here. Let's see, Moon Chiron. So we're seeing that Chiron with to his moon, early childhood and his emotional instability, pain, rejection, wounds. So yeah, even though his moon's in Taurus, it's really taking a beating here in a lot of other ways. Venus conjunct Saturn. Saturn is his ascendant lord, so Venus is adding a lot of creativity and expression. Venus in Gemini is pretty poetic in itself, so that's quite good for writing and poetry and music and all that. His sun is exactly by 1 degree conjunct North Node and Pluto in the 7th in Leo, so the sun's very strong here, but that, you know, this is very appropriate, prominent for somebody like Jim Morrison, as destructive as he was, as famous as he was, as a brilliant performer as he was. This all makes sense. Sun in Leo conjunct the descendant, conjunct Pluto, conjunct North Node. North Node conjunct the sun can indicate fame anyway. Mercury is here also in the 7th house in Leo. So great for expression, for creativity, for speaking to the public, to the masses, to the relationships. Relationships are obviously very important to him, but just being on stage in general and performing for the audience, that's going to be very strong for him. Ascendant exactly conjunct Neptune, drugs and alcohol in the 8th house. Again, very prominent, very appropriate and telling. Really strong in conjunct here with Venus and Scorpio to Pluto in Aries. So that again is very, and then the square to Mercury, right? That's very again, you know, telling and appropriate, makes a lot of sense. And then obviously Moon is still in the same aspect, but Moon, Mercury, so for the creative expression, especially Capricorn, so like dry creative expression when Moon and Mercury. So when Moon and Mercury conjunct, the heart can really be expressed, right? So if it's in Capricorn, it's going to be very dry expression, but nonetheless. Okay. Yeah, sorry, I think I didn't say enough about this. Pluto in conjunct Venus, again, the relationships are going to be very destructive, right? And then as well, this doubling over because Venus is in Scorpio, so it's driving his joys and desires into very deep, dark, destructive things, drugs, alcohol, that sort of thing. Lots of rampant sex, getting women pregnant left, right, and center. That's sort of all out. Okay, I think that's it. What was, yeah, we saw both of the trans. Oh, wait a minute, hold on. One last transit just to look at briefly. Gotta switch these around. 3 and 4, and then 2 and 3. Okay, this is his death. Okay, so Moon is exactly opposite at the time of his death by 1 degree. Moon's in Scorpio, so Moon's in debilitated. He's almost at a nodal return, close, or nodal opposition, sorry. Uranus is in conjunct his natal moon, so accidents. When Uranus is in difficult aspect to a planet, it can show accidents, sudden events, because Uranus is a bolt of lightning, sudden things, right? It's also in the 8th house, which is not good. Pluto's in the 8th house. Jupiter is exactly square Jupiter. Jupiter is in Scorpio, square natal Jupiter. That's quite interesting too. Right. Let's see if there's any other tells. Venus is conjunct Saturn. That seems okay, actually. Not everything is going to represent his death. Let's see, Mercury would be the 8th house lord. Where's Mercury? Mercury's in Cancer in the 6th house. Is it making any aspects? Not that I can see. But 6th house is a difficult house. And Saturn is his ascendant lord in Gemini, conjunct the IC. No, I'm not like, well, it is opposite natal or in conjunct natal Mercury. In any case, I'm not exactly sure. It's just worth looking at. I haven't studied this enough to really say, but the moon and the Uranus is interesting, Pluto, and Jupiter square Jupiter. Okay, well, that's pretty much it, guys. Oh, one more thing. Mercury is out of bounds and Mars is out of bounds. So let's just look at that real quick. So Mercury's out of bounds. His expression is out of bounds. It's going further, and that can be good. It can be bad. It just means it's going further. It's pushing the envelope. So his expressive ability, his poetry, his writing, right? It's going further. It's pushing the envelope. It's going out of bounds. Okay, and we find that interesting. That sometimes creates great art, great genius, great abilities. Sometimes it can land people in trouble because they just don't know when to stop, right? Especially at 0 degrees. That's also sort of like an out of bounds thing. It's going extremely far, especially with, and then this Venus as well. So very far, very out of bounds, right? And then Mars in Gemini again. So that, both, the dispositor of Gemini and then Mars ruling the 3rd house in Gemini. So his expression really is, and then Uranus. So we can see again, like it's just all adding up, layers upon layers, that his expressive ability is really further beyond, abnormally going into areas that other people are not going, unusual, like very rare, right? Okay. So that's Jim Morrison. Hope you enjoyed it. Hit the like button if you did. Subscribe if you haven't already. Leave a comment down below. Book a reading with me. My website is macroastrology.com. My email is macrogoldmachine@yahoo.com. And that's it for now, guys. I will see you again soon. Thanks. Bye.